They mocked me at the class reunion, until the helicopter landed. Madam Admiral, we need you. It's life or death. Welcome to Dusk Tales. Let's uncover what really happened. The grand ballroom of the old Riverwood Country Club, usually reserved for quaint local gatherings, had been transformed into a shimmering spectacle of nostalgia and thinly veiled competition. Chandeliers dripped with artificial glitter, casting a golden haze over the impeccably set tables, each adorned with centerpieces that screamed attempted elegance. The air was thick with the clinking of glasses, the forced laughter of former classmates catching up, and the low hum of a forgotten 90s pop playlist. It was the 20-year reunion for Riverwood High, and for many, it was less about reconnecting and more about projecting an image. Anya Sharma, however, moved through the room with a quiet grace that seemed almost out of place. She wasn't wearing anything ostentatious, a simple, elegantly tailored dark dress that blended with the subdued lighting. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, revealing a face that, while undeniably beautiful, carried the quiet intensity of someone who observed more than they spoke. Anya had always been an enigma in high school, brilliant but reserved, often found buried in books rather than chasing popularity. Her academic achievements were legendary, yet she lacked the social polish that defined the Riverwood elite. She was the one the popular kids never quite understood, and therefore, often dismissed. Tonight, it seemed little had changed. As she sipped a sparkling water, a group of familiar faces coalesced near the bar. At its center, as always, was Marcus Thorne. Even after 2 decades, Marcus possessed the same swagger that had made him quarterback and unofficial king of the school. He was louder, broader, and his perfectly coiffed hair now had streaks of premature gray. He clearly paid a fortune to conceal. He wore a designer suit that looked a little too tight. His laugh boomed, and he commanded the attention of everyone within earshot, just as he always had. His current entourage consisted of former cheerleaders who still clung to their past glory, and ex-jocks who now sported receding hairlines and bellies that strained their expensive shirts. Anya saw him spot her from across the room. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face, the kind that made her stomach clench with an old, familiar unease. She had hoped to make it through the night unnoticed, to perhaps exchange a few pleasantries with genuine friends, and then quietly slip away. But Marcus had always considered her an easy target, someone whose quiet nature he could exploit for a quick laugh. Her past, filled with subtle slights and dismissals, flashed through her mind. The whispered jokes behind her back, the deliberate exclusion from social circles, the way her accomplishments were always downplayed or attributed to just being smart. It was never overt bullying, but an insidious, constant reminder that she didn't quite fit in, that she wasn't quite enough. She had moved beyond it, building a life far removed from Riverwood, but the echoes of those old slights still had the power to stir a faint resentment. She squared her shoulders, took a deep, steadying breath, and prepared for the inevitable. The weight of expectations, the unwritten rules of this social arena, pressed down on her. She knew the game Marcus was about to play, and she was determined not to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. The ballroom continued its cacophony, but for Anya, the sound seemed to mute, replaced by the faint thrum of an old, unwelcome memory. The clinking of glasses, the soft murmur of conversations, the faint strains of jazz from a corner band, it all contributed to an ambiance of refined superficiality, a perfect stage for the drama that was about to unfold. Anya saw Marcus begin his slow, deliberate approach, his entourage trailing behind him like a loyal, albeit slightly older pack of wolves. He walked with an exaggerated confidence, his eyes locked on her, a smirk playing on his lips. She felt the familiar shift in the air, a subtle tension as other classmates, sensing an impending spectacle, began to discreetly observe the interaction. Some shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the pattern of Marcus's past behavior. Others leaned in, hungry for the entertainment. Anya remained outwardly calm, her hands clasped lightly in front of her, her gaze steady. She didn't fidget, didn't avert her eyes, didn't give him the slightest indication of vulnerability. This refusal to react, she knew, would only serve to fuel his need for control, his desire to elicit a visible response. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough for her to smell his expensive cologne, which somehow still carried the faint, cloying scent of high school locker rooms and cheap bravado. Well, if it isn't Anya Sharma, Marcus boomed, his voice cutting through the ambient noise, forcing heads to turn. Still hiding in the shadows, Anya? Some things never change, do they? His companions chuckled on cue, their laughter a dull echo of their younger, more cruel selves. Anya offered a polite, almost imperceptible smile. "Hello, Marcus," she replied, her voice soft but clear, completely devoid of emotion. Her calm demeanor seemed to momentarily throw him off balance. He preferred a cowering victim, not someone who met his gaze head-on with quiet self-possession. "Still as quiet as ever, I see," he continued, regaining his footing. "Always buried in those books, remember? Never thought you'd actually make it out of a library, to be honest. What are you doing these days? Still cataloging dusty old volumes somewhere?" His words were laced with feigned joviality, but the underlying sneer was unmistakable. The small crowd around them now pretended not to listen, yet their attention was fixed, their bodies subtly angled towards the unfolding scene. Anya felt the familiar sting, but also a distant amusement. His insults were so predictable, so unoriginal. "I'm still working," she stated simply, offering no further details, no defense. This brevity seemed to irritate Marcus even more. He wanted a story, a struggle, something he could ridicule and dissect for the benefit of his audience. "Working, huh? That's vague. Come on, Anya, tell us. Last I heard you were off doing some government thing. Sounds thrilling. Like auditing tax forms, or counting paper clips maybe." He winked at his friends, eliciting another round of forced laughter. Anya didn't flinch. "Something like that," she conceded, her lips barely moving. Her stillness, her refusal to be drawn into his game, was her greatest weapon. It denied him the desired reaction, rendering his attempts at humiliation oddly powerless. Marcus, however, was accustomed to winning. He leaned in, his voice dropping slightly, though still loud enough to carry. "You know, it's funny," he began, his tone dripping with mock pity. "We all knew you were smart, Anya, but smart doesn't always get you places, does it? Look at us." He gestured broadly to his group, implying success and grandeur. "We're doing pretty well, you know, real jobs, real impact. Some of us are even building empires." His gaze swept over her, a dismissive appraisal. "And then there's whatever it is you do. Quiet, unassuming. Must be tough. Always being in the background, huh? Not quite the big leagues, I imagine." The implication hung heavy in the air. She was a failure, a forgotten intellectual, while he and his ilk had conquered the world. The laughter around them softened, replaced by a tense silence. Marcus had just delivered his perceived knockout blow. He waited, expecting a flicker of embarrassment, a blush, a downturned gaze. But Anya gave him nothing. She simply met his eyes, her expression unreadable, and for a fleeting second, Marcus felt a shiver of unease. It was as if she knew something he didn't, something that made his grand pronouncements seem utterly insignificant. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken judgment, and Marcus's escalating frustration. He cleared his throat, ready to press his advantage, to finally break her serene facade. "Seriously, Anya," he started again, his voice now a little sharper. "You should have gone into something glamorous, something with a bit of a profile, like, I don't know, a motivational speaker, or maybe a life coach. You're so good at being quiet. You could probably teach people how to meditate or something equally." His words were designed to belittle, to mock her reserved nature, to highlight what he perceived as her lack of ambition or public success. His friends around him chuckled, a few murmuring agreement, clearly enjoying the spectacle of their old classmate being put in her place. Anya, however, remained impassive. She merely tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering, observing him with an almost scientific detachment. Her stillness seemed to amplify his bluster, making him appear more frantic, more desperate for a reaction. "It's a shame, really," Marcus pressed on, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "Someone with your brains, stuck in obscurity. I mean, here we are, celebrating our achievements, and you're just here, like a shadow at a party." He punctuated his sentence with a dismissive wave of his hand, as if swatting away an annoying fly. A few people winced, clearly finding his cruelty uncomfortable, but no one dared intervene. The social dynamics of Riverwood High were apparently still very much in play, even 2 decades later. Anya could feel the heat on her cheeks, the collective gaze of the room, the silent judgment. It was a familiar sensation, a ghost from her past. But beneath the surface, a quiet resolve hardened. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. She would not let him define her worth. Not here, not ever again. She took another slow, deliberate sip of her sparkling water, the ice clinking softly against the glass, the only sound breaking the awkward silence Marcus had created. Her gaze flickered over Marcus's face, noting the slight tremor in his jaw, the almost frantic glint in his eyes. He wasn't just trying to humiliate her. He was trying to prove something to himself, to reassert a dominance he likely feared was slipping away in the grand scheme of his own life. The irony wasn't lost on Anya. She thought of her real work, the true impact she had, the silent, profound contributions that far outweighed any superficial display of wealth or status. Marcus's world, built on appearances and empty accolades, seemed tragically small from her vantage point. "You know," Anya finally said, her voice cutting through the tension, still quiet, but with a new steel-like edge that made Marcus pause, his smirk faltering. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Her words were simple, yet they carried a weight that made a few people in the surrounding crowd shift uncomfortably. Marcus, momentarily taken aback, forced a laugh. "Oh right, of course. Still enigmatic, Anya. Keeping us guessing, probably working on some top-secret government paperclip inventory. Huh?" His voice was louder now, trying to regain the upper hand, to dismiss her statement as another one of her quiet quirks. But as he delivered his final, condescending remark, a faint, almost imperceptible sound began to filter into the ballroom. It was a low thrum, barely audible at first, easily mistaken for the rumble of distant traffic or the club's aging air conditioning unit. It was a sound out of place in the genteel setting of the country club, a discordant note in the carefully orchestrated symphony of false cheer. Marcus, still basking in his perceived triumph, didn't notice it immediately. He was too focused on Anya, waiting for her to finally crack, to betray some sign of hurt or embarrassment. His eyes narrowed, his chest puffed out, reveling in the silence he had imposed on the room. But as Anya's gaze drifted past him, toward the expansive windows that overlooked the manicured lawns of the country club, her posture subtly changed. It was a minute shift, almost invisible to the casual observer. But for Marcus, who was scrutinizing her every reaction, it was just enough to register. A flicker of something, not fear, not anger, but a heightened awareness, tightened her shoulders almost imperceptibly. The faint thrum grew slightly, gaining a deeper resonance, a rhythmic beat that started to cut through the ambient ballroom noise. A few people closer to the windows, engaged in their own superficial conversations, paused, their heads tilting slightly, a puzzled frown appearing on their faces. "What was that?" someone murmured, too quietly for Marcus to hear. Another person glanced towards the ceiling, as if expecting a leaky pipe. The sound was still distant, still ambiguous, but it was insistent, a foreign element, disrupting the carefully constructed normalcy of the reunion. Marcus, annoyed by the subtle shift in attention, waved a hand dismissively. "Probably just a delivery truck," he scoffed, forcing a loud laugh. "Don't tell me you're still afraid of loud noises, Anya, after all these years." He tried to pull the attention back to her, back to his performance, but Anya didn't respond. Her gaze was still fixed on the windows, her expression unreadable. The thrum intensified, growing from a distant vibration to a distinct, powerful rhythmic pulsing. It was no longer a truck. It was too sustained, too powerful, too aerial. The conversations in the ballroom began to falter. One by one, heads turned, not just towards the windows, but towards each other. Questions etched on their faces. The 90s pop music, which had been so carefully curated to evoke nostalgia, now seemed jarringly out of sync with the growing mechanical roar outside. The air, already thick with the scent of cheap perfume and old anxieties, now seemed to vibrate with a new, unexpected energy. The crystal chandeliers, which had seemed so elegant just moments ago, now trembled slightly, catching the light in an unsettling shimmer. Marcus, finally noticing the widespread distraction, frowned. His carefully constructed moment was being stolen, not by Anya's defiance, but by an unseen force outside. He spun around, annoyance contorting his features, ready to dismiss whatever interruption was ruining his triumphant moment. But the sound outside was no longer just a thrum, it was a powerful, throbbing roar that vibrated through the very foundations of the country club. And then through the large, arched windows, a shadow began to pass. A dark, imposing shape that momentarily blotted out the afternoon sun, sending a ripple of murmurs through the room. It was not a delivery truck. It was certainly not an airplane. It was too low, too deliberate. The distinctive thwop 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 of massive rotor blades began to dominate all other sounds, making conversation impossible. The realization dawned on many faces simultaneously. It was a helicopter, and it was descending, fast. The reaction was instantaneous. Excitement, confusion, and a surge of primal curiosity swept through the ballroom, drowning out Marcus's frustrated attempts to regain control. People rushed towards the windows, pressing their faces against the glass, pointing, their phones already out, scrambling to record this unexpected spectacle. The carefully polished veneer of the reunion shattered, replaced by an almost childlike wonder. Marcus, caught in the undertow of the crowd, finally turned to look, his mouth slightly agape, his brow furrowed in annoyance. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered, more to himself than to anyone else, completely overshadowed by the unfolding drama. But Anya, still standing calmly amidst the rising tide of chaos, watched the descending craft with a different kind of focus. Her eyes, instead of wide with surprise, were narrowed, analytical, as if she were mentally assessing its approach, its trajectory. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. A secret known only to her, the helicopter was now clearly visible, a sleek, dark silhouette against the late afternoon sky. It wasn't a civilian model. Its design was stark, functional, with no flashy branding, only subtle, official markings that were difficult to discern from this distance. It was a military-grade aircraft, powerful and purposeful, and it was heading straight for the country club's perfectly manicured golf course, bypassing the designated landing zones. The rhythmic thumping of the rotor blades was now deafening, vibrating through the ballroom floor, making wine glasses tremble on tables and conversations completely impossible. Dust and debris began to swirl outside as the downwash from the rotors kicked up. The sheer force of its descent made the country club itself seem to hum with a strange resonant energy. Panic wasn't quite the right word for the crowd's reaction, but a palpable disarray certainly was. Former classmates, minutes ago so concerned with their image, were now jostling for a better view, faces pressed against the glass, gasping, pointing. Cell phones, once used for selfies and status updates, were now aimed at the sky, recording this unprecedented intrusion. Marcus, caught in the periphery of the surge, looked utterly bewildered. His face, moments ago flushed with arrogant confidence, was now a mask of frustrated confusion. "This is ridiculous," he yelled over the noise, but his voice was swallowed by the roar of the descending chopper. "Someone needs to do something about this." His complaints went unheard, dismissed as easily as he had tried to dismiss Anya moments before. His sense of control, so carefully cultivated for 2 decades, was rapidly evaporating. Anya, however, seemed to absorb the chaos around her. Her gaze was fixed on the landing zone. As the helicopter settled, its powerful rotors still churning, she noted the precise, almost surgical way it touched down, the immediate shift in engine pitch as it prepared for shutdown. This was not a random flyby. This was a deliberate, calculated arrival. Figures were already emerging from the belly of the machine, even before its blades had fully spun down. They were clad in crisp, dark uniforms, moving with an undeniable sense of urgency and discipline that cut through the reunion's superficial atmosphere like a hot knife through butter. They carried themselves with an authority that dwarfed any social status symbols in the room. They weren't looking for a celebrity. They weren't looking for an autograph. They were looking for something, or someone, entirely different. The powerful downwash from the helicopter landing outside the country club's manicured grounds ripped through the genteel atmosphere of the reunion. Chairs clattered, unsecured decorations wobbled, and a few light centerpieces tumbled from tables as gusts of wind whipped through any open doors or cracks. Dust and small bits of landscaping debris swirled against the windows, momentarily obscuring the view. The noise was overwhelming, a thunderous roar that made conversation utterly impossible and forced people to cover their ears. Many recoiled from the windows, shielding their faces from the sudden blast, their excited chatter replaced by startled gasps and exclamations of alarm. Marcus, still near the window, stumbled backward, nearly colliding with a former classmate. His perfectly coiffed hair was now windswept, a few strands comically sticking up. His expensive suit jacket flapped around him, and his face was a mask of furious annoyance. "My God, this is outrageous," he shouted, though no one could hear him over the deafening chop-chop-chop of the rotors. "Who let something like this happen?" He glared at a nearby country club employee, as if they were personally responsible for the aerial invasion. But the employee, like everyone else, was captivated, staring wide-eyed at the unfolding spectacle. Anya, however, remained rooted to her spot, surprisingly unaffected by the wind and noise. Her dress barely rippled, her hair remained neatly pulled back, as if she were somehow immune to the chaos. Her gaze, steady and focused, followed the figures emerging from the helicopter. There were 3 of them, all in immaculate, dark uniforms, moving with a synchronized precision that spoke of extensive training and immediate purpose. They carried no weapons openly, but their posture, their focused eyes, and the air of unwavering authority radiating from them immediately conveyed their seriousness. They were not here for a social call. They ignored the gawking crowd, their eyes scanning the ballroom's interior with a practiced swiftness. It was clear they were looking for a specific individual. Marcus, still spluttering, tried to regain some semblance of control. "This is ruining everything," he bellowed, attempting to usher his bewildered group away from the windows, as if by moving them, he could somehow negate the disruptive presence of the military helicopter. But no one was listening. All eyes were on the uniformed figures, who now began to move directly towards the main entrance of the country club, their steps swift and purposeful. A hush began to fall over the ballroom, as the helicopter's powerful engines slowly wound down, the deafening roar gradually fading to a low thrum, then a distant whine, and finally, silence. The sudden quiet was almost more jarring than the noise itself. It left a vacuum, a lingering tension that heightened the sense of anticipation. All eyes were now fixed on the three figures who had entered the room. The leader, a tall, imposing woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, scanned the crowd with a practiced, assessing gaze. Her uniform was impeccably pressed, adorned with insignia that hinted at a high rank, though few in the room would have recognized them immediately. She moved with an undeniable aura of command, completely unfazed by the 100 pairs of curious eyes fixed upon her. Marcus, having recovered slightly from his initial shock, puffed out his chest, attempting to reassert his presence. He smoothed down his wind-blown hair, adjusted his tie, and began to walk confidently towards the approaching officers, as if to greet them, as if he were the host of this unexpected reception. He cleared his throat, a theatrical gesture. "Good evening, officers," he began, his voice attempting to convey authority, though it trembled slightly. "I'm Marcus Thorne, president of Thorne Industries. I believe there's been some—" He trailed off as the leading officer's gaze swept past him without so much as a flicker of acknowledgement. She wasn't looking for him. Her eyes continued their rapid scan of the room, her expression intense, searching. Anya, who had stood still through the entire commotion, now felt a subtle pull, a shift in the air. Her eyes met the lead officers across the crowded room. It was an immediate, silent recognition, a connection that transcended the chaos of the reunion. The officer's gaze locked onto Anya, and a barely perceptible nod was exchanged. Then, without a word, the officer broke away from her companions and moved directly towards Anya, her footsteps purposeful, precise, cutting through the murmuring crowd. People parted for her instinctively, sensing her singular focus. Marcus, utterly bewildered, found himself standing alone, his hand still awkwardly extended, his attempt at introduction completely ignored. He watched, stunned, as the officer bypassed him and his entire clique, heading straight for the quiet woman in the simple dark dress. The ballroom held its collective breath. All eyes followed the officer's path, a tangible sense of anticipation filling the suddenly silent space. The officer stopped directly in front of Anya, her posture ramrod straight, her expression grim. Anya met her gaze with an unwavering calm, her own eyes reflecting a deep understanding of the gravity that emanated from the uniformed figure. And then, the officer spoke, her voice clear and resonant, cutting through the stunned silence like a sharp blade. "Madam Admiral," she said, her voice laced with an urgency that made every head in the room snap to attention. "We need you. It's life or death." The words hung in the air, echoing in the stunned silence of the ballroom. Madam Admiral, the title, so starkly out of place in the context of a high school reunion, resonated with an undeniable authority. Marcus Thorne, who had been standing a few feet away, his jaw still agape from being ignored, felt a sudden dizzying lurch in his stomach. The smug expression that had been a permanent fixture on his face for the past 20 years, crumbled, replaced by utter disbelief. His eyes, wide and unfocused, darted between the impeccably uniformed officer and Anya, the woman he had just publicly mocked for her obscure government job. Anya, however, remained perfectly composed. Her expression didn't change. No flicker of surprise or vindication crossed her features. It was as if this dramatic entrance, this sudden declaration, was merely a standard part of her day. She gave a curt, professional nod. "Report, Commander," she said, her voice calm and steady, completely at odds with the dramatic pronouncement that had just shaken the room. The officer, revealed now as a commander by her own insignia, immediately launched into a rapid, hushed brief, her words a technical stream of details that were utterly alien to the ballroom crowd. Situation critical. Rogue deep-sea drilling rig. Containment breach accelerating. We're losing the submersible team, Admiral. The only viable solution requires immediate on-site command by someone with your specific expertise in deep ocean crisis management and subaquatic rescue protocols. We've exhausted all other options. You're the only one who can lead this mission. The words, though half-heard and largely incomprehensible to the confused classmates, carried an unmistakable urgency and gravity. Anya listened, her head slightly tilted, her eyes reflecting a deep understanding of the dire situation. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask clarifying questions. She simply absorbed the information, her mind already racing. Marcus, meanwhile, felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead. "Admiral," he whispered, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. His friends, who had been laughing at Anya just moments earlier, now stared at her with a mixture of awe, embarrassment, and outright shock. The cheerleaders looked pale, the jocks looked utterly deflated. The entire ballroom, which had been buzzing with self-importance, was now utterly silent, completely consumed by this unforeseen drama. Anya finally looked up, her gaze sweeping over the commander. "ETA to extraction point," she asked, her voice precise, authoritative. "5 minutes, Madam Admiral," the commander replied, gesturing towards the entrance where the other two uniformed figures stood at attention. Anya nodded, then glanced around the ballroom, her eyes momentarily meeting Marcus's. There was no triumph in her gaze, no smug satisfaction, only a quiet, almost melancholic understanding. It was a look that said, "You have no idea what my life truly entails, nor the weight of the responsibilities I carry." She then turned back to the commander. "Let's go," she stated, her voice firm, resolute. As she walked towards the waiting officers, her posture seemed to grow taller, her presence radiating an undeniable power that commanded respect. The reunion attendees instinctively parted for her, forming an aisle. The elegant dress, which had previously allowed her to blend in, now seemed to transform into an understated uniform, accentuating her authority. Marcus, rooted to the spot, could only watch, his jaw slack, as the quiet girl from high school, the one he had just called a shadow, walked out to board a military helicopter for a life-or-death mission. His carefully constructed world of superficial success had just been obliterated by a single title and the urgent demand of a world far beyond his comprehension. The sound of the helicopter's rotors beginning to spool up for departure seemed to mock his fading bravado, a thunderous echo of his colossal misjudgment. The very foundations of the Riverwood Country Club seemed to tremble as the rotors of the military helicopter roared to life, kicking up another tempest of wind and dust outside. The sound, less jarring now after the initial shock, served as a stark reminder of the extraordinary events that had just unfolded. Inside the ballroom, a profound silence had settled, thick with unspoken thoughts and collective embarrassment. Marcus Thorne stood frozen, his eyes still fixed on the exit where Anya Sharma had just disappeared. His expensive suit, his confident swagger, his carefully constructed facade of success, all seemed to deflate under the weight of the revelation. His face was pale, a mixture of shock and profound humiliation. His previous arrogance had vanished, replaced by a hollow, defeated expression. The former cheerleaders and jocks who had formed his loyal entourage now averted their gazes, shuffling their feet uncomfortably. Their forced laughter and knowing glances had been replaced by a deep, uncomfortable quiet. No one met his eyes. The dynamic had shifted irreversibly. Marcus's attempts to dominate the narrative of the reunion had backfired spectacularly, exposing his own shallow cruelty against the backdrop of Anya's undeniable quiet significance. A few classmates, those who had always felt a quiet sympathy for Anya, now exchanged knowing glances, a subtle sense of vindication in their eyes. The whispers began almost immediately, hushed and incredulous. "Admiral? Seriously? I always knew she was smart. But, an admiral, he really thought she was just a librarian. Oh my God." The words, though soft, were like tiny daggers twisting in Marcus's gut. He could feel their eyes on him, not with the admiration he craved, but with a mixture of pity and contempt. His public humiliation was complete, undeniable. He had tried to diminish her, to make her small, and instead, she had effortlessly dwarfed him, not with words or grand gestures, but with the quiet, authoritative power of her true self. Anya's exit was swift and purposeful. She didn't look back, didn't offer a final, cutting remark. Her dignity was her answer, her purpose her ultimate vindication. Her mission was too important for petty scores. As the helicopter lifted off, its powerful lights briefly illuminating the ballroom through the windows, Marcus could only watch as Anya's silhouette, now a figure of immense importance, was swallowed by the night sky. The reunion, once his stage, was now a monument to his colossal misjudgment. His arrogance had not only failed to humiliate Anya, it had spectacularly backfired, exposing his own emptiness to everyone present. He was no longer the king of Riverwood High. He was merely a footnote in Anya Sharma's extraordinary life. And the weight of that realization, the profound, public humbling, would linger in the ballroom long after the last guest had departed. Marcus Thorne, trapped in the suffocating silence of the ballroom, could feel the eyes on him. The hushed whispers were still circulating, dissecting his spectacular downfall. His clique, once so loyal, had subtly distanced themselves, melting into the crowd as if hoping to avoid guilt by association. The glamour of the evening had evaporated, replaced by an awkward tension that clung to him like a shroud. He tried to laugh, a desperate, pathetic sound that died in his throat. He tried to clear his throat, to straighten his tie, to conjure some semblance of his former arrogance, but it was useless. His hands trembled slightly, a telltale sign of his inner turmoil. The air, once thick with the scent of superficial success, now reeked of his personal failure. He felt utterly exposed, stripped bare of the carefully constructed image he had maintained for decades. He spotted a few former classmates pulling out their phones, not to record him, but to frantically search for Admiral Anya Sharma. The information once hidden from their high school selves was now readily available, confirming the breathtaking reality of her accomplishments. News articles, military profiles, commendations. Each piece of information that confirmed Anya's true stature was another nail in the coffin of Marcus's self-importance. The contrast was stark, brutal. While Marcus had spent his life chasing fleeting status and material possessions, Anya had been quietly dedicated to a purpose far grander, a mission that transcended personal glory. His empire of industries and wealth seemed hollow, almost pathetic, compared to the weight of responsibility Anya carried. He imagined the headlines, the inevitable social media posts, high school bully gets humiliated by Admiral classmate. The thought sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated shame through him. He had always thrived on the public spotlight, but this kind of spotlight, born of his own hubris, was a living nightmare. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this moment would define him, not as the successful businessman he pretended to be, but as the petty, cruel man who had tried to belittle an actual hero. He glanced around, desperate for an escape, for a single sympathetic face, but found none. The country club, once a symbol of his belonging and status, now felt like a cage, every wall reflecting his humiliation back at him. He couldn't just walk out. He felt rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the weight of what had just happened. His entire perception of success, built on the shifting sands of external validation, had just crumbled. Anya had won, not by fighting back, but by simply existing in her truth, by letting her true stature reveal itself at the most impactful moment. And Marcus, for all his bluster and perceived power, was left with nothing but the bitter taste of his own insignificance. He was not just humiliated, he was utterly exposed, a cautionary tale unfolding in real time, a testament to the fact that true worth is rarely found in the loudest voices or the flashiest displays. The reunion, his grand stage, had become his personal Waterloo, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the memory of Anya's quiet dignity and his own spectacular undoing would haunt him for a long, long time. The memory of that night at the Riverwood Country Club would forever be etched in the minds of those who witnessed it, a powerful, indelible lesson in humility and true worth. For Marcus Thorne, the fallout was swift and brutal, far beyond the initial, immediate humiliation. The video clips, hastily captured by shocked classmates, went viral within hours. Admiral Anya Sharma, a name previously known only in highly specialized circles, became a trending topic, her quiet strength and unexpected reveal captivating audiences worldwide. The juxtaposed footage of Marcus's arrogant taunts dissolving into stunned silence spread like wildfire. His company's social media accounts were flooded with comments, boycotts were called for, and his professional credibility, built on careful PR, began to unravel. Within weeks, Marcus was forced to issue a public apology, a pathetic, stammering statement that only highlighted his insincerity. Business deals evaporated, clients began to withdraw, and his carefully curated image as a savvy, respected entrepreneur was irrevocably tarnished. He learned, too late, that true influence isn't built on a foundation of mockery and arrogance, but on integrity and genuine contribution. Meanwhile, Anya Sharma continued her critical work. Unseen by the cameras, unburdened by the need for public adulation, the life-or-death mission she was called to that night was successfully completed, her expertise saving lives and averting a global ecological disaster. She didn't seek the headlines, didn't revel in Marcus's downfall. Her purpose was far greater. Her satisfaction derived from the profound impact of her actions, not from the fleeting applause of a reunion crowd. Her story became a quiet legend, a reminder that the most profound contributions often come from those who operate with quiet dedication, far from the spotlight. True strength isn't about how loudly you speak, but how powerfully you act when it truly matters. The value of a person is not measured by the accolades they display or the material wealth they accumulate, but by their character, their resilience, and the quiet dignity with which they navigate the world. This is a powerful lesson. Never underestimate the quiet ones. The world is full of individuals who operate with immense purpose and profound impact. Their true worth, hidden beneath an unassuming exterior. They don't need to brag, they don't need to boast, and they certainly don't need to diminish others to feel important. Their actions speak louder than any words, and when their moment comes, they can silence a room, or even change the world, without saying a single word of self-promotion. If you believe in the power of quiet strength, if you've ever felt underestimated, or if you simply found inspiration in Anya's story, share this truth. Let it be a reminder that true impact is often unseen, and that respect should always be given, regardless of appearances.